morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here this morning. I definitely won't take 15 minutes. First of all, I've thought long and hard about this particular debate in the last week, particularly because it has, how it will affect women angle. And it's easy for me to sit here and talk about the merits as to why we would propose to abolish the Seanad for all of the reasons that I will outline. But genuinely, I couldn't find one reason whether abolishing the Seanad or retaining the Seanad would have a considerable impact on women's representation in Irish politics. I would be far more concerned with the gender legislation that has been introduced to ensure that we have representation of women in our national parliament of the Dáil, and more importantly, from a local perspective, to ensure that organisations like mine and Noel's and other political parties have a serious commitment to finding great women who are already doing work at local and community level to empower them and to give them the confidence to stand for both local elections and national elections, and that's where we concentrate our efforts in Fine Gael. For me, the Seanad referendum was quite simple. In 2007 I ran for my very first election, the general election, and I wasn't successful. And that was very difficult. You don't run for an election thinking that you're going to lose. Everybody runs thinking you're going to win. And when you lose, it's really kick in the teeth. And you're soul searching for, particularly it's very personal, it's yourself. You're looking to see why didn't they like me. It wasn't Fine Gael, it was me. And it always boils down to the personal. So when members of my own party came to me after that loss in 2007 and asked me to run for the Seanad, and you get the whole pep talk, sure, I performed exceptionally well, even though I didn't feel like it. They told me I was wonderful, I was, knew I was a woman, it was exactly what they were looking for. Basically, I was a shoe-in with regard to the Fine Gael canvass to get on a Fine Gael platform to get elected to the Seanad. And if I'm to be very honest with you, feeling as bruised as I did, I very nearly believed the people who were coaching me, and I very, very nearly did take the road to go down to the Seanad. But what ultimately made the decision for me not to go that road was, number one, I was knackered, having spent probably 6 months of canvassing for a general election. But number two, when I looked at the platform of what the Seanad actually offered, it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be a representative for the people that I share my community with, I share my county with, and I shared, particularly policy views with. And that certainly for me didn't hold any truck with what was on offer in the Seanad. And so on that basis I decided to go down the road of the county council elections. When we took our policy decision a number of years ago to ask the Irish people to abolish the Seanad, it was having taken a number of months to actually look at what value the Seanad has actually offered for the last 75 years, and if it were to be reformed, in what way, shape or form would that new Seanad look like. And after we spent a number of months, and the team was headed up by Simon Coveney and Phil Hogan, who were both then obviously opposition spokespeople for different things. After that piece of work was completed, we came to the conclusion that no matter what way you cut the cake and no matter what way you reformed the Seanad, it potentially was either going to be one of two things. It would continue to be undemocratic and elitist, or it would become a carbon copy replica of what we have in Dáil Éireann. And the only difference that you could make to make it not a carbon copy replica would be to have midterm elections. And the only thing that we could see that would bring would be complete legislative gridlock, and that wouldn't be to anybody's benefit. So the proposals that we're putting forward to the Irish people, first of all, obviously in our manifesto beforehand, was that we would put the question to the Irish people to ask them whether they wanted to retain or abolish the Seanad. But our stage, I suppose, or our stall is being set out on the basis that, number one, the Seanad as it is undemocratic. There are only 3% of the Irish population that actually have a vote, and only 1% of those people, or only 1% of the population actually do vote. Of the people that do vote, over 70% of the Seanad, or the senators that are elected by other politicians and by national politicians or local politicians at county council level. And so the vast majority of Irish people do not have a vote and do not have a say. The second thing is it's somewhat elitist insofar as that the people who do actually have a vote that you would consider the general public are people who are graduates of particular colleges. And we find that somewhat elitist. But also, I suppose, most importantly for us is that when it was established to actually give voices to particular groups and sets of people in Ireland that wouldn't or didn't particularly hold a voice in our national parliament. And that's why the panels were constructed to give particular vested interests or sets of industry or cultural or educational bodies, to give them a voice and a view in Ireland. The university graduates were obviously from a particular perspective, Trinity College, to give the unionists a voice in our national democratic debate. But when it was actually established, I suppose the principles probably were true at the time. The Taoiseach's 11 appointees were kind of always a built-in guarantee that the particular government of the day were always going to have a majority in our second house, and so therefore that kind of made the whole appearance of checks and balances just that. It wasn't really established to have checks and balances and to hold the Dáil to account. It was set up to appear to have checks and balances, and the 11 appointees from the Taoiseach have always guaranteed that appearance has been upheld. I think quite simply what we're trying to do in our programme of political reform is to strengthen the Dáil, to strengthen the committee system, to make fundamental changes that actually genuinely need to be changed to strengthen politics in this country. And the question that we're asking people on the 4th of October is quite simply, do you want to retain a Seanad that for 75 years hasn't provided checks and balances? My colleague Richard Bruton has referred it quite simply to a watchdog that has only ever barked twice. And so we're talking about a statutory body, an institution that appears to have checks and balances, and even the very limited power that it does have, which is to delay a bill for 90 days that it might disagree with the other house, the Dáil. It's only ever done that twice, and once was by accident. So when we sit down genuinely and look at the real value of what the Seanad has for 75 years offered, we believe that we can do things differently. We believe that the Irish population of 4.4 million can be governed by a smaller number of politicians, by asking them to work smarter, by asking them to work harder, and in fairness we do all work very hard, but by asking us genuinely to work harder, by introducing a completely new radical way of producing legislation that will genuinely not only allow me as a backbencher and all of my other colleagues have serious input into the drafting of legislation, but all of those groups of people, all of those societies, all of those organisations that actually currently come before us and talk about issues that they have will genuinely have an opportunity to feed in to the pre-legislative stage, and so their input will be very much sought, valued, and will feed into the initial draft stages of legislation, and then we will go on to debate them obviously and tweak and provide amendments should there be requirements to do so afterwards. And I think the vital last piece of the jigsaw is that when a piece of legislation is actually brought forward to the Dáil by a minister, the chairperson of the committee that's actually debated and produced a report on that legislation will have equal debating time in Dáil Éireann, if assuming that the minister hasn't taken on board the proposals of committee work. And for those of you that don't know how we work at committee, yes, we do all represent our individual parties, but when we go through the doors of our committee, the partisan element of representation tends to be left behind. As Carol said, I sit on the health committee for the last 2.5 years, and genuinely, even though there's 26 people or members on the committee, there's a very small group of us that are week in, week out, arrive to do our committee work. We're of all parties and none, and we're very much committed to delivery of quality health service in this country, and we sit around collaboratively and collectively to try and debate and produce ideas and legislation that will be in the best interest of Irish people, not in the best interest of Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or Sinn Féin. We sit around and we leave our party badges outside and we try and create legislation and policy ideas that will benefit Irish people. That's what's on offer, and that for me is really exciting, because sometimes you get genuinely very tired of fighting with Fianna Fáil just because they say the grass is green, we have to say the grass is blue. Irish people are sick of that, and actually what we need is a collaborative model of producing legislation that's in the best interest of Irish people. And genuinely, having sat in Leinster House for the last 2.5 years, that's what's on offer for me. That's what's on offer to allow somebody like me to have a serious input into the idea that will espouse and eventually arrive into a piece of legislation, but more importantly, to allow us as a committee to draw on expertise knowledge, expert witnesses, and Irish society that will actually be affected by the legislation that we're proposing, to allow them to sit around and to discuss it and debate it with us, and not just in the national media. So that's what's on offer. We're asking people to allow us to fundamentally